Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists. Co-Chief Executive Officer, Sunrun, Edward Fenster. President and CEO, National Council of Raza, Janet Murguía. Mayor, City of Mesa, Scott Smith. Chief Executive Officer, Green for All, Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins. President and CEO, Goodwill Industries International Incorporated, Jim Gibbons. And our moderator, board member, the Clinton Foundation, Chelsea Clinton.
Please take your seats. I think it is terrific that we are now talking about adaptability, people, places, and enterprises here in America. Lots of alliteration there. Given that our immigrant history has always been a driver and a bulwark of our adaptability. And so with that in mind, I actually want to start with Janet. Given that immigration reform was such a dynamic part of our warm-up act, if I can say that about my dad, and the secretary. What do you think the real opportunities are with regards to immigration reform for people, places, and enterprises that are not the federal government, whether it be city governments, like, for the mayor of Mesa to your right, or enterprises like Ed with Sunrun to your left, or the people here in Chicago? I mean, what do you think really are the kind of galvanizing opportunities that you see?
Sure, thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think what I'd like to do is just make sure I reset on the statistics, because you've heard a lot about the growth of the Hispanic community, and I do think the immigration reform piece is central to how we want to grow our economy and grow as a country. But I want to remind folks that 1 out of 6 Americans is Latino, and under the age of 18, it's 1 out of 4. And for us, that's about 16% of the population. But also, when it comes to the workforce, and I think we want to have a workforce filter as we maybe perhaps proceed through this conversation, we know that by 2050, 1 out of every 3 American workers will be Latino, and as early as 2030, it'll be 25%. So when I look at the population that is here, I think it's important for us to invest and make sure that we look at a long pipeline that is already starting in preschool. And I'm encouraging folks to take that long view. But when you look at immigration reform and the potential for us to be able to energize and bring a boon to our economy with the dynamism that we see in this immigrant workforce that is already contributing right now. But if we can unleash them so that it's not work that's being done in the shadows, but actually work that is being able to contribute fully into this economy, and where folks are not being exploited because they aren't documented, I think that potential is enormous. And what we've seen and what you've heard already, I think it's a statistic that has been mentioned twice already in the panels that you've heard, and it's an astonishing one when you think about it. But when you look at the Fortune 500 companies, 40% of those companies have been started by immigrants. And that is the potential that we have to unleash into our economy. And those roles can be played out both in institutions like local governments, but I'm also a proponent of looking at how community-based organizations in partnership with educational institutions and with local governments can be still a key platform for how we can best prepare folks to enter that workforce, to have the skills and develop the skills where there are those gaps. But mostly, we need to make sure that folks can come out from under the shadows and be able to move fully into this economy. And then as we look at the future flow of workers, we need to have in this immigration reform elements that will allow for us to have that flexibility so that sectors, as we need them to be represented by more workers, have the ability to raise the caps and to be able to have folks come in a very strategic and deliberate way.
Jim, at Goodwill, I think you've had almost 30 million people over time go through your various workforce training programs, and you've helped place more than 190,000 people into real employment opportunities. And many of the people that you've helped place and many of those who participate in your workforce training programs are those who face historic barriers to accessing dynamic employment opportunities like those that Janet was just talking about, whether because they're senior citizens or because they have physical disabilities or because they're returning veterans. Could you talk a little bit about what you have seen to be really successful in your workforce training programs and in your employment placement programs?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chelsea. You know, it's interesting. If you think about adaptability and if you're thinking about a resilient economy, I think where we have to look is at the people that we have the opportunity and the privilege to serve every year. Because what I have seen is a group of individuals, whether it is the veteran or the person with a disability or the young guy who found himself on the wrong side of the law and is trying to become a giver, not a taker. What you see is this epiphany of accountability. But they know they can't do it all on their own, but they have to be accountable. And if you look at the lessons that we learn in terms of providing the tools and the supports, we don't empower the person; they empower themselves. We're just lucky to be the support organization. So we try to stay very real and very relevant in everything we do. The Macklemore song that's popular right now, more than 400,000 downloads. We know what poppin' tags means, and we know what looking for a come up means.
That is amazing that just happened. That McElroy got a shout out on the CGI America stage.
So, but everybody's looking for a come up, right? And everybody's looking for an advantage and an opportunity, and they have to be accountable. But what I think is important from a community perspective is that same thing. Collaboration or collective impact, it all matters, shared goals, but without the organizations involved, whether it's the government entity or the not-for-profit or for-benefit entity or the employers, for-profit or not-for-profit, pulling together but then being accountable for their components of that shared goal is the critical factor. And I think we've seen it throughout our 110-year life, and we started serving immigrants in 1902.
Mr. Mayor, we were talking backstage about how now on this stage today, we've heard sort of Hamdi talk about how rural America and small town America can be a real engine of economic growth, and Mayor Emanuel talking about kind of how Chicago and bigger cities in the United States are kind of helping fuel growth. You're the mayor of Mesa. There are 450,000 people. It's a significantly sized metro area. Could you talk about kind of how our mid-sized cities and our metro areas are really helping us adapt for the 21st century, and how Mesa in particular has adapted itself to be kind of on this growth trajectory that it's currently on?
Thanks, Chelsea. The interesting thing is that America's changed in the last 20 years or so. And there's two things that have driven that change. And number one is the Berlin Wall fell and the internet. And we are connected in a way, as Thomas Friedman always talks about, the world being flat and all that. But we live that in cities such as Mesa, for which the term boom burb was created. We're the 38th largest city in the country. But there's no doubt that we live in the shadow of a larger city, Phoenix. But as a city of 450,000, we have the big city opportunities and the big city problems. So does a city of 100,000, 150,000. But what the new world has created for us are opportunities that any American city can become part of the greater economy. Because we truly are not a national economy anymore. We are a series of metro economies, and those metros aren't just the big central city. I mean, Mesa, for example, is bigger than Atlanta. We're bigger than St. Louis. We're bigger than Minneapolis. and yet we're looked at as a suburb. But we're like every other city that's 100,000, 50,000, or whatever. What we need to do, and we talk about immigration, we talk about other things, is to understand that we live in this new world, and that whether we're talking immigration or economic development, we need to focus on those things that America has historically done best, and that is adapt. We adapted in World War II, and we were caught off guard, and before you knew it, we were the greatest manufacturing machine ever. We adapted after World War II. We've adapted throughout the years because of the creativity that's been brought on by the great diversity in this country. That happens in small towns, it happens in mid-sized cities, it happens in the middle of a large central city. But it's that creative juice and that recognize that this is what we do best, and whether it's in manufacturing or whether it's in patents or whether it's in education, I think America in a lot of ways, because we've got hung up on, for example, immigration as being purely a Latino issue. It's not. It's an American issue. And while we focus on issues like how many people are walking across the desert in Arizona, we forget that we're keeping out those immigrants that start the Fortune 500 companies that can really create wealth and create activity. That is happening in every size city, in every part of America, and especially in what used to be known as the burbs.
Can I just piggyback
please.
on that real quick? I just think it's interesting. You capture something that I think in terms of the image around immigration reform that has created a perception that's been negative, is that the media, when they have presented this issue, you never see immigrants working in very difficult jobs as the backdrop for immigration reform. You always see the wall with the fence and people climbing over it. When it is an issue in terms of border security, but people are losing sight of the longer view and the broader impact that we need to leverage from these individuals who are already here.
You know, Phaedra, you and I were talking earlier about kind of how many people have been left behind who are already here in even the recent recovery, and you know that we unfortunately are, as was discussed earlier this morning, an increasingly unequal country. And you know, Janet talked about kind of images being important, and I think often there's an image of kind of the green movement in the United States being just kind of Ed, right? Like the white guy who lives in San Francisco who's like started this renewable energy company. And yet clearly, as we were talking, so many of the people who are most vulnerable to climate change are underserved, under-resourced communities. And that's also where a lot of economic potential resides to address climate change. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing to kind of break that stereotype and change that equation?
Absolutely. I just have to make two quick personal observations. The first is that I'm on a panel with Chelsea Clinton, and we talked about come-ups and basically rap songs. So I want to just acknowledge that that's where I'm at in life, because I'm still trying to process that part.
No, wait. When you start talking with me on rap songs, then you'll know you're in a different dimension.
That won't be quite as impressive to my nieces.
Not as impressive. Not as impressive, but a lot weirder, I'll tell you.
I'm sure it may be. I have to say first that the most innovative people I know are the poorest people, the people that I grew up with. And you all don't know my grandmother, but she recycles oil and paper towels. And so if you use oil on the stove, she will yell at you if you throw it away, because she has a jar on the stove that you're supposed to pour it back into. And so part of what I think is important for us to recognize is just the innovation that exists in communities where they've had to adapt to not having a lot. And so part of what we're really committed to doing is to figure out how do you remove the barriers that keep people out of the economy and keep them from finding good jobs. And the reality in this moment is that our country is going to be made up of more people who have barriers to good jobs than it is going to be made of people who are able to get a good job. I have a husband who just retired after 22 years in the Air Force, and I have to say it was harder for him to figure out where he was going to work, what he was going to do, and how to get a job than I think it was for my single mom who didn't have a formal education. And so for us, what we're focused on is first, how do you remove those barriers? There's two specific examples I would give. One is we run a business academy program that a partnership with Accenture where we're training 1,000 small businesses to actually provide coaching, figure out access to capital so that we can actually provide support to those entrepreneurs at every level. The second is a partnership with Lane and around transportation, because part of what we have to figure out how to do is to cultivate jobs that actually grow the economy, jobs that have manufacturing, things that people make things with their hands. And so we're really committed because the reality of climate change is the people first and worst hit are the same people first and worst from the foreclosure crisis, the same people first and worst from anything else. And so if we don't have a strategy that meets those people's needs, we actually can't have a strategy about how this country really recovers.
You know, Ed, you started a company in 2007, which now seems like it was a different kind of economic era, listening to the conversation between my father and Secretary Liu earlier. And I think, you know, you really are here partly because of kind of the adaptability of your enterprise. I mean, I think it would just be really interesting for you to talk about Sunrun and kind of how you have really, emulated what Hamdi said earlier, which is that in each challenge there really is an opportunity if you know where to find it.
Well, first, by the way, thank you for that unusual introduction earlier. I appreciate that. We have 4 core values as a company, one of which is adaptability. Luckily for us, that comes naturally in Silicon Valley. Certainly starting a consumer finance company in the biggest depression in 100 years in a new asset class, needing to get capital from profitable banks, was a challenge. But interestingly, most of the work we do on that now is on the regulatory side. As Silicon Valley moves from sort of just traditional software into sort of the real world, we face entrenched business interests at the regulators that really impede adaptability. Some great examples, apart even from my industry, Uber, a company where you can push a button and a car shows up to take you somewhere. Even the state of California sent them a letter that was a cease and desist letter on the basis that cell phone GPS was not an approved weights and measure. The hotel lobby obviously fights Airbnb left and right, and in our case, the utilities who now see our business as succeeding in the absence of any subsidies, have taken the fight to the regulator as well. And so most of the work that we have to do actually is trying to bring the regulation with us, particularly where these entrenched interests exist. And it's really interesting to see Silicon Valley developing this competence on this area because it's becoming a major obstacle to adaptability and innovation in the nation today.
Jim, given that Goodwill has been kind of in the business of ensuring that people can get a good job and have the training they need to secure a good job, for more than 100 years. How do you, just listening to Ed talk about the rapid change of innovation, and particularly from the perspective of Silicon Valley, how do you ensure that you're preparing the people that you train for the jobs of tomorrow and not just the jobs of today?
We can't do it by ourselves. So it all comes back to working within communities and collaborations, but accountability for your role. So actually through CGI America, we made a commitment 2 years ago with a community college collaboration. Because if you look at the community college network and you couple that with Goodwill, you probably got the 2 biggest non-governmental workforce programs in the country coming together. And our goal 2 years ago was to get 20 collaborations underway, 20 a year, and we're at 87. And our completion rate right now for the thousands of folks that we've piloted with is about 71% versus an average completion rate in community college of 27. But if you look at our history, we used to think it was good enough to put somebody through a training program and have a nice little award ceremony and give them a Goodwill certificate. And that worked. But it doesn't now, because now the credentials have to be fungible, they have to be stackable, and a person needs to be able to carry them from community to community. And so this partnership with with the community college is really allowing us to elevate our portfolio of services and really moving us from the world of helping and working with individuals to find the right job to working with individuals to find the right career path. And we got to meet every individual where they are and understand their goals and aspirations. But we can't work with everybody individually all by ourselves. So these types of collaborations allow us to challenge ourselves, but to also bring more solutions to the individuals that we focus our energy on.
Janet?
Can I build on that? I think that more and more as we look at these 21st century job needs, we have to be looking at the sectors that are going to be in higher demand, and yet we have to make sure we have the workforce to meet that demand. So manufacturing jobs have gone down. We're looking at how can we do multilateral partnerships to really help address those gaps. And for us, an example that we've used as we look at in the healthcare sector, growing need for jobs. What are we doing to really help prepare the Latino community and others to fill those spaces? And for us, we've seen our affiliate network, which are community-based organizations, and even here in Chicago, we have an example of an affiliate that partnered with a healthcare institution, with a community college, and we had a federal grant for this. So there's a lot of moving parts, but that synergy and that dynamism helped us with the career pathways in health. So Latinas who had been health promoters, promotoras de salud, who've been helping in the community, were asked to help and translate in health facilities. Well, what we found is that we could actually create a pathway for those women, oftentimes women, who were not only doing those translation services, but they could actually get credentialed and become certified registered nurse assistants. And that would help increase their income, and it would meet needs in the economy. And then some of them have gone on to be registered nurses. And I think it's those types of multilateral partnerships coming together that in the sectors that are going to be higher need are where we're going to have to all come together and really make sure that we're meeting people where they are.
Can I just add one thing, which is I think the most important thing about training is it has to be connected to a job, right? We're no longer in the moment where training for training's sake is worth it. And so it's like no training program that doesn't equal a job. And so I think what we've really appreciated about this space is the ability to have a relationship with nonprofits, community colleges, with employers. And so I would just say that I think there's incredible partnerships, but the thing that we are being completely disciplined about is we can't do fly-by-night companies, and we believe in companies that are innovating, so we support that, but you cannot train people for something that doesn't have a pathway that allows them to support their family, about the nature of the job, and that it's connected to something that's going to exist. Because my greatest fear is I was in Silicon Valley, and everyone trained people to be network administrators. So what happened is the training was a cycle behind the technology. So you had people who spent a year in training, spent money, and then they thought they'd get $100,000 jobs. And by the time they finished training, the jobs were gone. And so I just think the thing that I would just implore is that there's incredible opportunity in this moment. Recycle Force in Indiana is employing people, ex-offenders doing recycling. And there's a place in Washington, D.C. that's doing solar installation. It is possible, incredible examples here. But training for training's sake is actually not what we need to be focusing on.
But one thing we do need to do a better job of is making that connection. We talked about these partnerships, and I'll tell you, there's nothing more frustrating as a mayor than to have a segment of the community come and says, we have people who are in need, who are looking for work, who are capable, and then you have business leaders who come and say, you know, if I could just find people who are properly trained, I could fill these. In the middle of nearly 8% unemployment, we had over 3 million jobs in America, high-skilled jobs that have gone empty because we have this gap, and we're not doing a good job of really figuring out the training and the education, the post-secondary, which is what we're going to need to give people a true career path that matches with the need of the business community. We still sort of flounder on that. We don't have a good connection. I remember one business come into me, and they were looking for lath operators. Now, if you've looked at a lath operator nowadays, you really can't even see the lath. It's basically a computer screen, and it's very high-tech, highly skilled. And he came to me and he said, you know, I could hire 20 of these if I could find trade. And I said, well, have you talked to the community college? Have you talked to the vocational school? Well, not really. I went to the vocational school and the community college said, have you reached out to this business? And all too often I hear, well, yeah, we're ready to go, but we're missing on a lot of these connections. And I think as a country, once again, we like you said, Phaedra, it's not just about, oh, he's trained, we're going to fall into an opportunity. Like Jim said, you train for specific opportunities. We have a hard time understanding where those new opportunities are. We do a great job with people who develop skills and then work within a system that encourages creativity and success and adaptability. But we have not adapted to where our real economy is, and so we have this gap between those who can and the needs that are out there, and it's unfulfilled.
And Ed, what do you think the sort of responsibility, but also the opportunity is here for Sunrun or the private sector? I mean, given that, similar to Hamdi, I mean, in a few short years, you're the largest, residential home solar panel purveyor in the country and financer. You need people to be able to put those solar panels up, to produce them, to provide maintenance to them. Many of those are jobs that, Phaedra could help train people to do. I mean, how do you ensure that you're sufficiently connected?
So nice to meet you.
Yeah, no, please. I don't want to interrupt.
We could date. I just want to tell you what my qualities are.
We're actually very thoughtful about this. Hiring is actually really hard. Hiring well, at least. It's amazing. Even with all the technological innovation around it, it's still a terribly clearing market.
So how do we make it easier so that it's more efficient for you, but that it's also then more efficient for the people who would want to be hired?
So exactly. So what we've done as a company, we made an express decision in our business that we weren't going to build out a installation workforce ourselves. No one has ever successfully scaled a national construction company before. We felt like a much faster way to do that was to go into the individual communities, find companies that either had the competence and were doing it already, or were in a tangential industry like roofing or window installation, and give them the training materials, and then rely on them to train people and build out their companies. And it's been successful for us. We have never, in the history of our company, ever has it taken on average more than like 3 months to install a system from the moment that we have a new customer, and all but 2 days of that is a regulatory delay. Whereas we have a major competitor who's vertically integrated and has been trying to build out this large national workforce, and at times it takes 9 to 14 months for them to install a system. So we've only been able to do it by viewing it as a very local area of expertise and finding the people in a particular community who we think are most capable at it and partnering with them because we couldn't figure out a good way, honestly, ourselves to do it.
Chelsea, I think the big opportunity here and where we have to adapt is really a mind shift. We always think that business or the employers are the solution, and they're the job creators. But I actually would argue that they're the opportunity creators, and when we collaborate and we're as local as possible to do this, the individual's responsible, has to be accountable and want to learn, or the community has to create the opportunities, whether that's education or organizations like ours or others. But they have to be accountable for that part, and they've got to work with the businesses to understand what their needs are for tomorrow. But there's only an opportunity created until a trained person is in that job, and then the job is created.
Mr. Mayor, clearly, we have a strong bias at CGI America that partnerships are necessary to ameliorate and overcome any of the challenges that we confront, particularly kind of in this ecosystem of trying to figure out how to provide equal opportunities to everyone. And you were talking just a few minutes ago, and it struck me that you really are this sort of great matchmaker, and that you listen to all these different local needs, you try to pair them with the right people, and while it's terrific that you kind of define your job as mayor to kind of provide that kind of service, that effective investment in your city's future, at some point that's not necessarily scalable. How do you ensure at a local level that those connections are happening more organically, that it's apparent to Ed if he comes to Mesa whom he should partner with, if someone wants to start a sort of green recycling program and Phaedra knows how to train people to do that, that how to find her? I mean, how do you do that at a local level, both for national investments, but also for the constituents you already have?
Well, I think, first of all, define scalable. I mean, I know we talk scalable as being on a big basis. To me, scalable is the neighborhood. To me, scalable is the school. To me, scalable is a business segment. And so what we try to do is as Jim said, we tried to change the environment in Mesa. One of the challenges we had is that we have one of the largest school districts, K-12 school districts in the country, and with the highest graduation rate of the top 50 school districts. And yet we have a horrible matriculation rate. Our kids are graduating, they're not moving on to post-secondary education, and that's the death knell for opportunity. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to change the conversation, and we realized that one of the things is it wasn't in their lexicon, it wasn't how they thought to move on, and that sounds interesting, but it just wasn't there. To them, high school was the ultimate goal, as opposed to really the starting place. What we try to do is say, how do we change the conversation? We thought about bringing new colleges into Arizona. Now, many of you are in places where you have 50 to 150 colleges in your city. Arizona didn't develop that way. We have Arizona State University, which is 70,000 plus students. And we don't have a lot of the liberal arts colleges, the small little church colleges and others that have grown up. So what we did is we went out and we looked for colleges that would come into Mesa, and we wanted to create a college town in reverse. So we went out and sent out solicitations and interviewed 12 legacy schools that were over 100 years old. We now have 5 liberal arts colleges coming into downtown Mesa from Illinois, from Pennsylvania, from Missouri, that are all over 100 years old, and it's amazing how it's changed the conversation in our city. Because now you start talking about potential. You start talking about what you need to do. And even though they're colleges, the interesting thing is now kids are talking about, well, what do I do after high school? Because the conversation has changed. The culture has changed. We've scaled it to an individual by creating a larger discussion, a larger conversation, a success that people can see, and then we've tried to boil that down to the individual school counselor, to the individual community worker, whoever it is. We say, look at the great things that are happening in your neighborhood, because this means that you too have opportunity available. We found that just this one major change we made in our community had a ripple effect, and it scaled by itself.
Janet?
No, if I can make just... Thank you. One comment, just to add this. Data is so helpful. Where it is easy for us to find the right people to partner with, it's because there are government organizations publishing data that we can use and rely on. And
are some local or state governments better at that than others?
Absolutely.
Such as?
So the data we rely on, Arizona actually has good data that helped us grow to Arizona as the second state that we grew to. California actually used to have the best data, although now actually the rebate program for solar in California is gone, but solar still works without the rebates. They're not still tracking this data, and it's a great problem that hopefully next year they'll fix, but not sooner. So just the easiest way to clear a market is with better information, and the more that a state or a local government can make that information available, the easier it is for folks like us, particularly in the age of the internet, to get that data and put it to work.
So
Janet?
I just want to take it to the next level in terms of work and wages. I mean, that's really important, and we want to do everything we can. And at the National Council at Raza, we have a robust workforce development program, which is important. But we also, if we're going to be a resilient country and we really want to make sure our folks have all the tools necessary, one of the big challenges we have in the Latino community, and again, this is a large cohort now, is that we still have too many in our community who are unbanked, who have, even if they are able to cobble together a few resources and have the wages that they need, they're not having there's not financial inclusion when it comes to the economic mainstream. And one of the things that we've been working on, and it's been a partnership, and it's kind of taken us an opportunity to do partnership at a national level with financial institutions that normally were challenging because of their practices, but we've really tried to create a relationship with them so that not only can we challenge them on the one hand and really tell them where they need to do more, but also educate them and work with them so that when it comes to piloting programs, so that our community can better have access to financial services and to the thinking and the training that needs to happen with them, we've expanded our homeownership counseling network, because what we're finding is the challenges with wealth and assets. Our community, the Latino community on average, has less than 10% of net worth than the non-Hispanic whites. So you're looking at wages and jobs on the one hand, but it's also about how can we really, if we're going to fully leverage these communities and their contributions, we have to put them on a pathway to economic strength and building and acquiring assets. And so for us, having partnerships like we have with the Bank of America, where we've really done 4 cities, and I think it's almost 400 people that we've involved in a pilot, where we actually are expanding, instead of homeownership counseling, it's financial counseling, and we're actually helping folks with a financial coach, open bank accounts, savings accounts, and over the course of a year, finding out that they can then leave that program and really be able to preserve and build wealth as they move forward. And I just think if we're talking about our resiliency as a country, it's about jobs, it's about wages, but it's also about building wealth and acquiring assets. And if we aren't doing that, we're not really looking at the long term and leveraging the full contributions of these communities.
Phaedra, when you were talking about first and worst, and you talked about the foreclosure crisis affecting so many of those who were also affected by natural disasters like Katrina or Sandy. One of the great realities, tragically, is that as the stock market has risen and as wealth has been created for much of America, it's also kind of the first and the least, right, who are left out of those dynamics. How do you think about, and Jim, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts too, how do you think about in your job training programs, not only ensuring that, yes, to Janet's point, someone can get a job, but that they understand then kind of they have the financial literacy that they need once they have that job to ensure that that job really can be a wealth generator for them, that they know how to save, to invest, to build credit. I mean, how do you think about kind of both of your responsibilities as you're training people for the workforce, that you're also really training them? I think Janet's completely right, to create and preserve wealth.
So much of what we do is also training businesses, right? So we train small businesses so that their businesses grow, because we think that it's not, like Janet just said, which I think is important about building assets, is that we want to see not just the worker, but also to be able to see where do you create additional opportunity. So we focus on those folks. I think the issue of first and worst is really important. And I think the issue of who gets hit and how they get hit and what we do, for us, we don't have as much of a problem in terms of helping people manage their finances. It's a much greater challenge for us to make sure the nature of the job is a good job. And so that really is the challenge, which is how do we make sure...
How do you define a good job, out of curiosity?
Well, there's what I would define. What we look at is family supporting wages. Can you actually support yourself? And I think the way I think about it just as a human is, does the person not have to do 2 jobs so that they get to participate in their kids' PTA, right? Do they have health care? We talk about the kind of country we want to be in. What I've always appreciated about CGI is it's like envisioning the best of us and coming together to figure out how we make that happen. But I feel like we have to have a very honest conversation that we want technology, we want innovation, and that's meant incredible things, but it doesn't always mean that everyone's boat is rising. And so we actually have to figure out, what does it mean that now not only are people's boat not rising, but more people are on the boat that's not rising, which means it's really going down. And so I think a discussion about just the nature of the job, I think what's important for us at Green for All is I think about things like the role you're playing. What support could we provide you so that when you're in those communities, the resources you're investing create the best possible job for those communities so that you know that the people there are getting health care, that the nature of the job, and also that it's the greenest possible, right? Because we want to reduce carbon emissions. So I just think that that's what we're trying to be really good at, is how do we make sure the nature of the job is a really good one, and how do we make sure, because I had a baby 11 months ago, so now I'm very conscious of the fact that it's really important that people get to have the time to actually be parents or whatever they want to do. So I just think it's important that we be clear, it doesn't actually happen naturally.
If I can just link two topics that have been at issue today. It is embarrassing how difficult it is for illegal immigrants to obtain banking services in this country. And how difficult it is for people to even be banked in these neighborhoods. I happen to live in a Latino neighborhood in San Francisco in the Mission, and the Chase, it was formerly a Washington Mutual, that is right next to me at 24th and Mission. I actually ended up chatting with the branch manager for a little bit, who told me it was their most profitable location in San Francisco. Now, we can discuss whether or not we think most profitable is a good thing, but it's interesting to show that people are making money on this. Again, I don't think the information around it is available, and then just how much pressure there is on banks, either regulatory or for other reasons, not to serve customers who have assets. But aren't able to demonstrate a Social Security number, for instance.
Yeah, I just to respond or build on that is that I think what we're finding with this program that we've piloted is that we're able to do, and one of the things that is helpful is to actually get research out there and talk to folks about what they perceive as their own challenges, whether it's the internet, and we still are seeing some people who want to do everything online. Well, we still have a digital divide out there. So you can't go online if we still have gaps like that. But we're also finding that there's language issues, and if we can find the fact that customer service is still important to these folks, and they actually want to feel welcome. I mean, it's interesting. We want cultural competency if we're going to be able to really have the kind of outreach that financial institutions want to utilize to be successful. They really need to have that kind of a filter so that they know what these folks actually need and want, and then we can plug them into the, merge them into this system. But without research and without actually partnering to experiment and have these kind of pilots, I think it's hard to know for sure. But that potential is there, but we need to be honest about what some of the challenges are and be prepared to address them.
Jim?
10 years ago, we, in working with the Casey Foundation, really started along a family strengthening path. But prior to that, we always thought, get a job, get a job. And, there again, learning, right? That wasn't enough. And family strengthening evolved for us into family financial stability. And so we don't even characterize it as a strategy or an initiative, but just an integrated approach to how we work now, because you got to get the skills, you got to get the job, you got to start earning it, you got to learn how to manage it, and then you got to save it and preserve it. And we move along that path in a real integrated way across all of our programming, so that the individual, and if you think about that young guy that came out of a relationship with our justice system, it doesn't do us any good to help a person get a job if they're not then able to pay their child support and then they go back to jail. So it's all a wasted investment unless you have it fully integrated. Like the middle class of this country is typically trained by our parents. We've got to do that across it, and we've got to build these social bridges and break through these barriers and these unwritten rules that exist, so that every individual kind of builds the stability for their future.
I want to ask one final question of each member of the panel. Are you optimistic? And if you are lukewarm about that question, or if it's just no, what needs to change to make you optimistic about our ability to adapt to the 21st century and be the country that clearly all of us here hope and expect us to be? Ed?
Well, I'm the amongst my co-founder and I'm the optimist. But unfortunately, maybe too optimistic. I have optimism. I think that the big problem the United States faces is, as a country, we just have too high a discount rate. We don't do anything until it's so painful. It's like we vote with our credit card at 22%. So I think it's like, ultimately we'll get there. I think everything takes too long and is too painful, and it would be great if we could get there a little bit more quickly. But it's a side effect potentially to a democracy that we'll have to manage.
Winston Churchill, we do the right thing after we've tried everything else. Janet?
Well, I'm absolutely optimistic, and I think it's actually a character of many who are in immigrant communities or in the Hispanic community. We are optimistic and we work hard. I would just say there's 4 points if we're really going to lean into this next century and really leverage the full potential of all of us, and that is that partnerships and relationships matter. No one sector or no one organization can do it by themselves. The second one is I really encourage, particularly the private sector, to take the long-term view. You know, sometimes you see, you know, a cohort of individuals, maybe you think they're not profitable, but if you're willing to do those front-end investments and take the long-term view, it will absolutely pay off. And then I think we need to be able to take risks. I think, you know, we've got to understand that in a time where we need considerable change because the world has changed and our country has changed and the demographics have changed, you know, maybe look at that workforce challenge and think of your pipeline as really starting as those little Head Start kids right now. And let's be willing to invest in that now so that we'll have that workforce that can be competitive and not only be prepared to invest in it, but advocate for that. I know some people think that it's a little bit edgy and too political, but I think more and more we have to press ourselves to be advocates and actually be a voice for that change. It's not enough to stand on the sidelines anymore. And the last piece I would say is that we have to be bold. The world is different. The country is different. The same approaches cannot work. We need to be thinking innovatively and creatively and give ourselves enough space where, yes, you want the sure bet, but work into your businesses, your foundations, your organizations, something to do creative and innovative. We absolutely have to do that if we're going to be successful in the 21st century.
Janet just described most of the mayors I know. Mayors by nature are optimistic. If you're not optimistic in this job, you don't last very long because reality slaps you in the face a lot. But what you also see is you see the incredible potential in your communities. So I'm cautiously optimistic because if you look through American history, there has never been a civilization on this earth that has adapted, that has faced more serious challenges and overcome them. And every time we've overcome those challenges, we've overcome them at a higher degree. Do we have the capability of doing that? I see that every day in my job. I'm worried that somehow we're still stuck in the post-World War II and we're not in the 21st century enough to recognize we need to adapt more, we need to gain more knowledge, and we need to get serious about our future because what we have was earned by someone else and we take it for granted. So that gives me the cautious optimism. But I am very optimistic that we can, as a country and as cities, that we can create a better future for our kids.
I am very optimistic. I spent today earlier in a session of people trying to find solutions to the city's problems. So just the fact that the lens that people were looking at was incredibly heartwarming, and I think it was the mayor's session. I also have full confidence in the millennials. I saw that time cover, and I felt like I wanted to write a response back and say that they have more information at their fingertips than we probably had we could even figure out how to get to. And so the question is just when do they use that information and how do they use that information? But I think that that generation of millennials is going to do right by us.
Jim?
I'm feeling a real big pressure to not be so optimistic after all of that. If your glass is half full, you're an optimist, and half empty, you're a pessimist. I think the glass is pretty big right now. And I'm optimistic we can get it to half full. But we got a lot of work to do, and we've got to change our mindsets in terms of setting ego aside at the organizational level, whether that's the government or the businesses or the not-for-profits. It's in terms of coming together, creating, identifying what the priority problems are to solve, creating those shared objectives, and then holding each other accountable to solving those problems and creating the solutions that really matter. That we need to adapt to have a sustainable economy at all the local levels so that nationally we can be effective as a country.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists. I also, would be remiss if I didn't point out that the panel was bookended by someone who talked about the fact that our discount rate is too high, one of my great obsessions, and someone who cited a rap song, one of my great pleasures. So I am grateful to the panel for many reasons, but most of all because I am more pragmatically optimistic now than I was an hour ago, because clearly each one of you are doing things already to make our country stronger and are committed to working together to ensure that we live in a better world tomorrow and are more concerned about tomorrow than yesterday. So thank you to our panel. Thank you to all of you.